Hey everybody, it's me, Remy, the comic book poser, and I'm here today to welcome you to Enter the Poserverse. I read a lot of books last week, and it's Monday, so you know what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you about all the books that I read on last week's New Comic Book Day that you should pick up on this week's New Comic Book Day if you missed out, and find out what made the list after this.
Hey, little girl, did you want to know a secret?
I got 5 on it. 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
This might have been the hardest week for me in terms of ranking my top 5 books as I've started to try and trim things down. And I think you're going to be shocked as to what my top book is this week, and we'll still see if I change my mind or do a little bit of last minute shuffling as I go through the process of making this video to change my mind. But I'm going to give 3 honorable mentions, so my top 5-ish books of the week. But my honorable mentions are Undiscovered Country 10. This book was wild in terms of looking at the history of Unity, the history of the conflict between Unity and Destiny, and this was kind of the first big bit of action that we got after a lot of bit of setup in the last couple of issues. Nailbiter Return number 7 was pretty good from Image. You were dealing with a weird kind of hop back and forth through the past in terms of figuring out what happened once everybody kind of returned to Buckaroo. That there's weird nostalgia happening, and that's not the right word or the right way to describe it, but that's what it feels like, is some weird kind of flashbacky things that you're not really sure what's the present, what's the past, and there's some repetition that happens throughout that's kind of cool. And then my last one from Marvel is Daredevil number 24. This book was just really good in terms of looking at what Daredevil's long game may be, right? We knew he was on the brink of going to trial. In book number 23, we met his brother in the annual, who we learned in book 23 was joining the legal team since Matt Murdock has, represented Daredevil when Daredevil wasn't in the courtroom in the past. And then it just takes a unexpected turn at the end, and new relationships are formed, some deals are made, and what Elektra kind of reveals in the last 5 or 6 pages is kind of interesting as a motivator for what happens to Daredevil during the process of his trial. So those 3 books were pretty good. I still think if I kind of played with this list a little bit more, that, 1 or 2 of those books could have replaced something higher up on the list. But my mind is made up, so here we go. Coming in at number 5, from Mad Cave Studios, is Dryfoot number 3. It's written by Jared Lahan with art by Orlando Casado, colors by Warina Sharada, and America's favorite letterer, Justin Birch. First, this is a really cool kind of wraparound-ish cover in terms of what's going on. And this book, this shit hurted. Jared has said when he was interviewed by just about everybody, that we would all get mad at him in book 3, and I think everybody should tweet, and I will put his Twitter handle right here. It's like at Jared Lahan. Tweet at him about how mad you are about book number 4, because it's rough. In a good way. Don't go, you piece of shit, you have destroyed comics, and I hate you. I hate what has happened for story purposes in this book. Like I said in my preview on my blog, I kind of saw it coming, but not 100% in the direction of the way that it played out. But I will show you my favorite bit. And it's as 2 of our characters are kind of talking about the heist, that there's this kind of callback to scenes from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom that I think is just kind of done in a pretty hilarious way, as they think they're going to kind of get away with the heist from the drug dealer's club. And I tweeted Jared after, rage tweeting at him about how much he made me mad during this book. And then I was like, but I will say that Indiana Jones sequence is dope. And he deferred nearly all of the credit to Orlando for making that sing. That is one of the most entertaining bits that I've read in comics, from both the story part, an art part, and a nostalgia part, and I think they nailed it. It's a really good book. I believe this went from being a 5-issue series down to a 4-issue series, so I'm interested to see how this all resolves itself in December. Coming in at number 4, I'm pretty much a homer for this book, but Department of Truth number 3 from Image. It's by James Tynion IV with art by Martin Simmons. Letterer is Aditya Bidkar, and the designer is Dylan Todd. So this is about school shootings, and it's kind of rough, and if, you know, you are someone who can be put in uncomfortable places from school shootings, this might not be the book for you, and I can relate to that. As someone who is a, public school teacher, I am terrified of 2 things. Number 1, getting COVID from one of my kids and bringing it home. And then number 2 is just kind of the ever-present threat of not knowing where some of this violence comes from. But this book focuses on a woman who lost her son in a school shooting and just started reading all kinds of shit on the internet and started believing in, like, crisis actors and false flag operations and those kinds of things, and how it changes her as a woman, as a motivator. And I really liked this 2-page sequence where she's starting to talk about, or it's narrated about how she's dealing with, like, getting hate mail and bricks thrown through her window and all of that kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden, like, her mind changes, and she thinks that her son is alive somewhere, that he may have been a crisis actor. We finally get one of our maybe clues to some of the through material, as we've seen 3 different conspiracy theories in 3 different books, right? We got flat earthers in book 1. In book 2, we got, like, the satanic teachings at preschools. And then in book 3, we get false flag operations. But we see this black hat pop up in, like, the first 8 or 9 pages of the book. And there's negative reaction by some of the agents to that artifact kind of being discovered. And it's clearly, what Jack Ruby's hat, the guy who shot Oswald, after Oswald killed Kennedy, allegedly. But it's interesting to see if these things are going to keep kind of popping up as something that, will be these little story devices, some elements of, like, I don't know, things that have debunked conspiracies or stopped conspiracies from fleshing themselves out. I don't know really how I want to describe it, but it's interesting seeing the reaction to that hat as kind of the first big artifact that somebody has their hands on in the world of conspiracy theory. So I've loved this book. I've been variant chasing. I've been cover buying every issue of this book that I can gobble up because I think it's really, really, really cool. And that's the kind of stuff I want. All right. Coming in at number 3, another book from Image, Scumbag number 2. I mentioned this book when it came out, and I don't think it made the top 5. It was something that I liked, but it was something that was just kind of, I was halfway into it. This book is fantastic. First of all, it's written by Rick Remender, the art is Andrew Robinson, and the colorist is Moreno Decino, and it's lettered by Russ Wooten. So if you didn't read book number 1, the scumbag wanted to get high on the horse, stumbled into an alley where there was a fight between, like, two entities. He picks up the wrong syringe and injects himself with some kind of formula that gives him superpowers. And he makes a deal with, like, some agency that's like, we need you to discover a bomb and shit. And he makes a bunch of random demands. So this woman shows up in his favorite watering hole / drug pickup spot. And to motivate him to do anything is this big old glorious tackle box of drugs that there's just about anything in there that'll tickle your fancy and ruin your life, but it's okay for the scumbag. We're starting to see why people maybe care about him or this formula. We see something happen to, like, a high-ranking politician. And then my favorite thing is when he's told not to do anything, and then all of a sudden anytime calls him a scumbag is when he, like, full hulks out and realizes his power and potential. This book did change artists between issue number 1 and issue number 2, and it's my understanding that you get a different artist in each issue of the book, but I think it didn't change the way I read the story. I liked it as much as I did the first one, maybe even a little bit better, and that's not an insult to the artist of the first book, but I think their story really starts to click more in issue 2 than in issue 1. So I'm a big fan. Coming in at number 2 from Vault Comics, and this is part of the Nightfall imprint, is I Walk with Monsters number 1. It's written by Paul Cornell. The artist is Sally Cantrino. The colorist is Dearbla Kelly, and it's lettered by Antworld Design. So this book starts with like a serial killer getting ready to kill this woman, and she's just kind of taunting him, and you can tell that she's there hunting him, that she knows he maybe doesn't have the guts to really kill again, and then all of a sudden, and you find that there's this, that beast is a dude, and I'm not spoiling anything because that's like the first 5 pages, and you find out that these folks may be hunting down people that are undesirable individuals. You start to get little bits of backstory into her and her childhood. I really think that that's going to start building in the next, book or two in terms of how her childhood may have some kind of impact on her. But this book was fantastic. This was maybe the 3rd or 4th book I read this week, and I was like, this is going to be my pick of the week, because this is just all kinds of in my wheelhouse from the type of story. Y'all know that I'm a big homer for Vault at the moment. The art is fantastic for this kind of creepy, gory, like horror-ish tale, and it's amazing. I am excited for issue number 2 to come out. I think I picked up a couple of variant covers of this book from Ninja Dairy Comics, but I really thought this was going to be my book of the week. And then I read something else. I don't know if in the last couple of weeks I've had something from the big 2 as my book of the week. I know last week I was like, holy shit, Batman made like my number 2. Coming in this week at number 1 is The Other History of the DC Universe, book number 1. It's written by John Ridley. The layouts are Giuseppe Camicoli. The finishes are by Andrea Cucci. Color is Jose Villaruba. And the lettering is Steve Wands, who I've talked about my love of Steve Wands before. This book might be the best thing that I've read in the entirety of 2020. This book might be the best thing that I've read in the year and a half I've been back in the comic book game. So, this is a very narrative-driven story from the perspective of the man who is Black Lightning. You get some description of how he wanted to, run and be competitive, that he couldn't be fast enough to save his father, right? He wanted to be a record holder at the Olympics. He wins a gold medal and sets that record. And then he decides to just kind of move around and become an at-risk school teacher, which I can relate to that a little bit. I teach at a Title I school, but not at kind of the at-risk places that you see Black Lightning. But he starts kind of commentating on what we are seeing in terms of other superheroes around the 70s, in terms of how people are glorified. You see that he gets married and decides to go back home. And then you start to see him talk about one of the prominent black superheroes at the time. Jon Stewart is the Green Lantern. But he kind of writes about him as being just kind of like a stand-in who does not give a fuck about anybody. That there's an instance where he came to speak to an at-risk school, and Jon Stewart just kind of floated in a condescending way above he and the kids the whole time. And you kind of look at the struggle that he has with the role of, like, black superheroes at the time. And then a gang takes over the neighborhood he lived in. One of his prominent students was lynched by a gang, and then he decides to don the helm of Black Lightning. Where this story becomes fascinating is not only is it the kind of narrative that we don't get about superheroes today, but we don't get these kinds of stories about like people of color who are superheroes, or people of color who are written into these big universes that we love. And not only does it look at his struggle as a superhero in an area that people do not give a shit about, like Superman shows up and is like, oh, you should stop doing all of this stuff over here, and he's like, oh, I'm glad you could fly over here and realize that my neighborhood is being terrorized by a gang and drug lords, so I'm going to take care of this shit. And he kind of dresses Superman down, and Superman just kind of floats away. At one point, you can see that he's put through trials to be invited to be a member of the Justice League. And when they make him the offer, he's like, no, I'm not going to be your token superhero. The dialogue that this book brings forward about race, especially in this day and age where we are still grappling with very difficult issues of race, that this is something that really resonates, with me as a teacher in a high population of minorities in my school, right? We are, I think it's about 60% non-white to white, that looking at representation, looking at the struggle that this man has to deal with, not just as a professional, not just as a superhero, not just as a man, but as a husband and a father. It's fascinating to look at kind of this question that he has about juggling of all of his obligations. So this story is just very thought-provoking, and the moment I finished this, it was at maybe 30 minutes before Comic Burritos This Week in Comics on Wednesday night, and in the Discord I was like, y'all haven't read this shit yet, you need to read it now, because I think this needs to be in your picks of the week. If not, you'll be kicking yourself for not reading it. And Todd, about 5 minutes after I had said something, was reading it and had finished it, and I know it was his pick of the week. I know Cole started it before their live stream, and I have yet to talk to him about how he feels about this, but this book it's the kind of story that we need to hear. It's the kind of conversation that needs to be brought forward about how white the space of comics is, about how white the face of the superhero genre is, about how white, even the types of people who write about, blog about, have channels dedicated to, comics and comic culture, is that it's way not representative of the readership, let alone the world that we live in today, or at any point that these comics have been created. And every time I've read this, that, before filming this, this is maybe my 5th time through the book, that I find new things that just make me sit here and think for a while. So the potential impact that this book has, not only as a comic book, but in terms of staying power with me as a reader, in terms of a thought piece, in terms of me thinking about the way that I interact with not just my students of color, but people of color in general, right? That this becomes a very, very kind of personal narrative that forces me to interrogate my white privilege in the deepest of ways. And I'm going to keep reading this book. I'm going to keep kind of thinking about all of these things, but it's just really fucking good. And I was talking to the owner of my LCS, because this was one of the books that we'll do raffles sometimes, where if you buy any of the regular covers, that he'll draw for an incentive. And he was like, yeah, not very many people pick this book up. You need to read this book. And I know we all say that, and we're like, oh, this is a good book that you should read. You could fucking throw away everything else that I've talked about all year, right? Every book that I've really enjoyed, that I thought has brought something new to the stage. Like, this book carries a punch, and it should start conversations. It should make waves. It should make you have the same kind of, internal dialogue, conversations with people, the same kind of interrogation of race in not just the comic book space, but in the world, through this very clever vehicle. So it's fucking amazing. And I know I try and minimize my use of profanity on everything outside of my live streams, but this is, like I said, maybe one of the best things that I've ever read in comics, period. And you can challenge me on that. Like, I'll die on this hill. That's how good I think this book is. It's how important I think this is as a thought piece, argument piece, whatever it's intended to be. But it's just really, really good. And if you don't like it, let me know. I'm not going to send you $7. I would say that, but I'm poor. So what did you think? Are there any books that you read this week that didn't make my list? Are there anything that you disagree with in terms of the ranking? Did you read other History of the DC Universe Part 1 and you don't think it's as good as I did? Let me know down in the comments below and we can have a conversation. Y'all know that I respond to every single comment, like, heart, thumbs up, all that stuff. But let's talk comics. Let's talk shit. Come on and chat with me on my Wednesday live haul video. Probably going to go live on this Thursday. What am I going to talk about? Shit, I don't know. Let's talk about this book. Let's talk about something. But let me know what you think in the comments below. And as always, thanks for stopping by. And have a good one.
Hey, little girl. Did you want to know a secret?
I got 5 on it. 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.